This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Kahn Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Hopefully we have some adventure enthusiasts listening today because we have a great episode coming up for you. I'm really excited to have Lance Gillies on the show. Lance is the CEO of EarthCruiser, a US-based company that designs and manufactures off-road recreational vehicles and truck rigs for expedition and overlanding. Originally from Australia and built to withstand rough conditions in the outback, Lance is quite literally a trailblazer in his field. I've admired EarthCruiser for years, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about his business and journey as an entrepreneur. Thank you, Lance. I really am grateful that you took the time to join us today. And can you start by just introducing yourself to the Only the Strong Survive audience and sharing a little bit about kind of your journey up to the point of starting EarthCruiser?
Yeah, g'day everybody, and thanks for a little bit of your time. So, Dan, mate, I really appreciate this chance to have a bit of a chat about what we do. This could take hours, the intro, but I'll try and keep it brief. My wife and I, we just love to travel. We actually met in a jungle in Malaysia. We're those people. And so this is something we've always just loved to do. I have a background in specialty vehicle building, always loved the extreme off-road events in different parts of the world and obviously very much in Australia. So when it come time for us to do some more traveling of our own, as far as vehicle-dependent traveling, where we're going to spend extended periods of time in a vehicle, which we've always done, but this time we wanted to go further, we wanted to go longer, and we wanted to do a little bit more comfortably. There was nothing really to buy. So that's where EarthCruiser comes from. It comes from passionate people who love to travel and with a background in knowing what a vehicle's supposed to do on and off the road. Couldn't find anything that really suited us, and so we designed our own. That's the really short story. There's obviously a much more of a backstory there, but the product and the company comes from a passion and a drive to go and see as much of this world as we can and enjoy it at the same time. So we understood and understand that more is not necessarily better, but not quite enough can spoil the trip for everybody. So as we're designing our vehicle, we wanted to have that nice balance of functionality and practicality. So that's where the idea of EarthCruiser come from. It has developed over the last 15 years. In the very beginning, it was mostly just for us, but we quickly recognized that more people were kind of in the same boat as us, particularly in our groups of acquaintances and friends who had done the extreme off-roading, stuff like that, and now they were also interested in getting more interested in touring, but didn't want to lose any of that go anywhere capacity. So that started well in Australia, still going very well in Australia. Our reason for coming to the US is my wife's American, and she really wanted to come back home for a while and spend some time with her family here. She's been in Australia a very long time. And so she was starting to sound too much like me, and her mum really wanted her home. And so we thought, okay, fine, we'll do that. We come over to the US just in 2011-ish, and not with the intention of building EarthCruisers here. It was absolutely so Michelle could spend some time with the family. And I used to commute backwards and forwards to Australia, keeping the business going there. And then it was interesting, when we first came here, the whole idea of an overland off-road vehicle, outside of the insanely fantastic Jeeps, but as a vehicle to actually live in, not play in, it was a bit of a foreign idea at the time. And so I thought, well, this is kind of interesting because flying over the US, you see so much public land, and I was stupid. I didn't know who owned it. I didn't understand the rules, didn't understand the accessibility, and I thought, this is really strange. I mean, why aren't more people spending more time in some of these stunning places? And so fast forward a little while, there was some people said, hey, Lance, would you build an EarthCruiser for us in the US? And I thought, well, that's a really great big commitment. I mean, building a fun truck, that's one thing, but in our way of thinking, the moment that a financial transaction has taken place, that's the beginning of the relationship. It's not the end of the relationship. So that was a really big moment for us. If we're going to make a commitment to have products in the United States, that's a really big commitment. And I said to Michelle, are you sure you want to be here? Are you sure you want to spend the next X amount of time in the United States? Because once we start this, you're in, right? You can't bail. It's a commitment. And she said, yep. Was what she really wants to do. And I said, okay, all right, well, that's what we'll do. And we built the first EarthCruiser. We built the house in Australia. We sent a chassis from the US to Australia. We put it all together in our factory there, brought it back, got it compliant. I mean, it was a US chassis, which made it easier, but got it compliant. That was an interesting thing on its own because the RV industry had never seen anything like this before. We know we don't use propane, we don't use LPG gas, we're all single source and all the solar systems. They'd never seen anything like it. So they kind of threw their hands up and said, listen, we don't know what to do with this. We showed them the documentation that's required for the ADR's Australian design rules and the EU rules, which you must build a vehicle to in Australia. And that was, again, more than what was required and still is required, generally speaking, for building vehicles here. So story short, it wasn't very difficult for us to get a very legal, compliant, true overland vehicle registered and licensed in the United States. Once that vehicle arrived and the customer was very, very happy with it, we said, okay, well, the next step now is if we're going to do this, we need to go and find where we're going to build them and what we're going to do. So that was a world all by itself. We didn't know anybody.
The first one you did in the U.S., and we're going to go back a little bit, but the first one you built in the U.S., where physically in the country was that? Was that in Bend or was that somewhere else?
We physically built it in Australia.
Oh, okay. So it was completed there and you imported it in.
Exactly. But the chassis was from the US. So that made that left-hand, right-hand thing a whole lot easier.
Well, and I want our listeners who aren't familiar with EarthCruiser, first of all, go on your phone right now that you're listening to this show on and Google it so you can see what we're talking about. But to give them a mental image, because I want to make sure everyone realizes this isn't what a traditional, I think these days, especially in 2024, people hear overlanding and they think about a Jeep or a Tacoma with some, Max Trax boards and a rooftop tent. And this is not at all what we're talking about. So we spend time on public land with our kids every month. We try to be on the road anywhere between like 4 and 8 weeks a year. We do it a little more traditionally. We've got a travel trailer that we pull behind a 4-wheel drive, big diesel crew cab. But I remember the first time I saw one of your rigs, we were in Glacier National Park and it was Memorial Day weekend. And I didn't realize because we were camping in the park that they don't even open that road all the way through until the snow melts. And so going to the Sun Road was still closed and we were kind of frustrated and we had pulled over to look at a glacier and couldn't get through. And I look over and there's this big Mitsubishi kind of medium duty box 4-wheel drive thing with this huge kind of box on the back and solar panels and big tires. And like, what the hell is that thing? And I went over and I started talking to the guy and it was one of yours. And this guy's like, oh yeah, I've already been down through South America and Central America. It completely blew my mind. I didn't even know that type of thing existed. And it's such a cool deal. So can you explain a little bit what the platform is? Because it is a really different thing than I think most people, it's definitely not a traditional RV. So explain what you're building.
Not sure how far we want to go back here, but it's for automotive, right? We like to build trucks. All right. So had plenty of Land Cruisers, had plenty of Nissan Patrols, all very popular in Australia, of course. The fundamental problem with all of those trucks is that their weight carrying capacity. They're the ideal wheelbase. The wheel tracks, they make their own wheel tracks, so they're good that way. But it's the weight carrying capacity. Super reliable, wonderful vehicles, etc., etc. However, they are always going to be limited by how much you can carry. The number one limiting factor, particularly in Australia when it comes to how far you can go, is water. Australia doesn't have all the beautiful mountains that North America does. Water is very, very scarce, extremely scarce. And so that's one thing that's going to stop it. And water's heavy. All right, so we decided, okay, if we're going to build this thing, a normal 4-drive chassis is not going to work. I had a very good relationship with Mercedes-Benz trucks and Volvo trucks, Scania trucks, again, doing the specialty vehicle building stuff. And I had built a number of bush fire trucks using the Fuso and Isuzu 4-drive chassis. Yeah, you're right. Here they're well known as box trucks, if you will, but they're actually sold around the world. The Fuso in particular is sold in over 70 countries. So its wheel track is pretty much identical to a Land Cruiser, and its wheelbase depends on the model, but its carrying capacity is 3 times that of a Land Cruiser. So if we have a cab over truck, very popular in different parts of the world, not as popular in the US, around the world, far more popular. Cab over truck, your back of cab to end of chassis gives you roughly 15 feet of real estate to build your house, yet it's under 22 feet long. So you have have a massive amount of space, a very, very competent four-drive. It's sold and supported in 70 countries, which is far more than most vehicles, and it is going to have absolutely no problems with carrying capacity. So what happens in Australia is that, referring to the ADR, Australian Design Rules, because that vehicle was imported into Australia to carry rocks, but now we want to build something that carries people, it's got to be completely recomplied. So it started life on dual wheels, and we wanted single wheels to keep the tracks the same, but we're going to change the suspension. We don't want it to, ride like a billy cart. We want to make a nice ride, and all the things that we want to do. So what happens is you apply to the federal government in Australia and say, this is what I want to do, and they go, that's great. We don't care if you're Toyota, Mercedes-Benz, or EarthCruiser. You are now going to have to go through the entire process of recomplying that truck to a new application. So that process takes between 12 to 18 months. The federal government in Australia come and check up on you. They don't trust you. They'll just show up at your workshop whenever they feel like it and go, okay, all of these dozens of things that you said you're going to change, and we're going to require you to change because compliance is different if it's going to carry rocks or people. They come and check up on you. So that commitment to start that is absolutely massive. Again, referring to when the RV industry saw the stuff that we had to do, I was naive. I just assumed everybody in the world had to do all this stuff. I didn't know. It's a mammoth undertaking. So what that also does is, because we weren't modifying a vehicle for our application, we were designing a vehicle for application. That's a really important part. So when it comes to the way the suspension works, the way that the house has a kinetic subframe that sits on, so when you drive around the corner, the thing doesn't flop all over the place. Its off-road abilities and all the things that we wanted it to be able to do. As far as the federal government in Australia was concerned, it was a brand new automotive vehicle, period. So that's where it started. And so we had very specific criteria for ourselves about, had to be 12 volt, it had to be single fuel source. There's no propane, no LPG. Mostly they just run on diesel for heating and what have you. The solar systems we have now are still absolute world standard. All of that stuff, and how they charge themselves up and how they don't need to be plugged in and all of these things. That wasn't a modified vehicle from their perspective. That was just how the vehicle was. So the truck that you saw, if it, it would have had a bull bar on it, would have had spotlights on it, it would have had probably 35 or 37-inch tires on it, had tow bar and all that stuff. None of that is a modified vehicle. That is the way it was complianced in Australia, and it is complianced in the United States. That is a stock standard truck as far as they're concerned. And that's a really big deal. It's a different perspective of doing things. So, all those fantastic Sprinter vans you see everywhere, they're modified. EarthCruisers aren't modified. EarthCruisers are stock standard overland vehicles. That's it. They're licensed and registered as an EarthCruiser.
So the first one you built there, and then you brought in, and then you and your wife had that conversation and said, hey, let's make a go at this. And so you started in what, in 08, right?
1st of April 2008 is when we formed the company. April Fool's Day. That always seemed appropriate.
So you and I have that in common. We both started our businesses in 2008. And I know in my experience, that was right when the recession was getting just ripping. And I had a good job at the time, and I left it, and everyone said, you're insane. Like, what are you doing? Like, the world is melting down. I kind of tend to be contrarian by nature. And I said, there's no better time to start a business because everyone else is running for cover. But you were selling a very expensive product at a time that the whole world was going into a recession. Was that an issue in Australia? And then what happened, I guess, was a year or two later that you came here and brought the business along. Did that have an impact, or was what you were doing so new that it almost didn't matter?
It absolutely mattered. But it's interesting you say about timing, right? So a couple of observations, if you will. Again, starting in Australia, because what we were doing, nobody had ever done it before. It was super risky in Australia as well. We really wanted a truck. So if we were going to do this, if we were going to do it for ourselves, I wanted to make it so it was absolutely the best it could be. And so that meant going down this track. If we were just going to make one and not have a business out of it, we probably didn't have to go to this extreme. But we really want to make it so wherever you took this thing in the world, it was never going to be a problem. Is this thing allowed? We wanted to have the paperwork match the product, match the vehicle. And that's a really big deal when you're crossing borders and going to interesting places and trying to convince border guards that, no, this is okay. If the paperwork doesn't match what they're looking at, that could be the end of your adventure right there. So that very much started with the end in mind. But to your point, because what we're doing is very unique, because things weren't going well, financially around the world, Australia wasn't as badly hit as quickly as the US, but it certainly caught up, that people were hungry for work. And so once upon a time, they might have turned you away, but this time they go, okay, we'll take a risk on it because we may as well do it. So that actually worked in our favor. And another observation, again, I was door knocking if we're going to build in the US and thought, I had no idea how many we might sell. Absolutely clueless. Didn't know. Had no idea. So I'd go to places, fiberglass manufacturers and nuts and bolts people and all sorts of places. Again, I didn't know how to buy nuts and bolts in America. I had no clue. Absolutely clueless. Knew nobody, not a soul. Go knock on their door and they go, well, how many of these things do you think you're going to make? And I said, 10 a year. They just literally get up and walk away. Wasn't worth their time. So that was interesting because at home, 10 a year, geez, that's high volume. That's great. That's excellent. So the scaling, that was a culture shock of culture shocks of how to communicate one's vision and one's dream. You got to find the right partners and not knowing anybody, not knowing where to start. And of course, obviously it's worked out great. But at the very beginning, that was interesting.
So I assume those early people that walked away, they were expecting you to do like OEM numbers, right? They want to see like hundreds or thousands of units. So at that point, are you just going and buying retail, or do you just keep looking for vendors?
You just do, right? You just keep chipping away.
So once you decide, okay, we're going to make a run of it, it sounds like for a variety of reasons, you come to the US, including some personal ones with your wife and her family. Was Bend the first stop, or did you go somewhere else first and eventually relocate there?
So again, the reason we're here, so Michelle could spend some time with the mum and dad. Her mum and dad live in Portland. We were in Portland for a year, and Portland is the most fabulous town, but I discovered one thing: it rains a lot.
Yes, it does.
So absolutely fabulous town. I said to myself, if we're doing this, we are not staying in Portland. That is not going to happen. I said to Michelle's dad, 4 hours driving seems pretty fair when it used to be a 24-hour aeroplane ride, and we both agreed. And we literally got a map and a piece of paper and a piece of string, did 4 hours. What's that driving distance? And it went through Bend. It was that simple. I had no idea. Clueless. Absolutely no idea. Absolute true story. We hired a car. It was January. Pouring rain in Portland. Me, Michelle, and the dog, we had a little Labrador that would come with us from Australia. We drove up to Mount Hood. It was snowing. Never driven through snow before in my life, ever. So we stopped the top there somewhere and let the dog out. So the dog jumped in the snow and got himself buried in the snow. And I thought, well, I better go get the dog. So I went and got the dog and I buried myself in the snow. Michelle is killing herself laughing. She thinks this is just so funny. Anyway, we all piled back in the car. That was my first experience with snow. Thank you very much. Drove over the mountain, arrived in this place called Bend. And again, Bend wasn't having a great time right then. That's 2011, 12-ish. And the sky was blue. It was freezing cold, but the sky was blue. And I said, yep, this will do. We can make this work. It's got an airport. Yep. No, Redmond, close. Redmond, LA or LA to Portland flight. Yep, easy. I can get back to Australia easily. Done. That was it. Then I started my door knock appeal. And that's something else I discovered. I didn't know I was clueless. I saw these buildings with all the doors shut, and I thought, geez, this is not too good. A lot of people were happily working, but you had to keep the door shut because it was so cold.
I kind of love that you have this sort of rebellious company that builds this sort of unusual product that's made for people with very kind of adventurous spirits, and that you landed in. I mean, I love Bend. We spent some time there as a family, and it's got a cool vibe, that town. There's a lot of makers and artists and little breweries, and it's got a little bit of that Portland kind of independent spirit. I feel like it's a little more outdoor adventure than the big city, and it seems like it aligns with what you guys do.
It's been terrific. All jokes aside, I mean, again, we talked about building EarthCruisers that could sustain for a long time without water in the middle of a desert in Australia. I was so clueless about building a vehicle for the cold. I mean, I had just no idea. Why would you want to go somewhere cold? Makes no sense to someone like me. From a company's perspective and building vehicles perspective, it's been absolutely fantastic. There's one thing to go and play in the snow, but there's another one to be able to build vehicles that can maintain all of their functionality in absolute extreme weather conditions. I mean, from a vehicle builder's perspective, Bend couldn't be more ideal. I mean, it gets a terrific summer, but it gets a really good winter as well, where we can make sure that we're fulfilling that promise to our customers that no matter where they take our vehicles, they're going to be okay. From that perspective alone, it's been absolutely superb.
So Lance, the thing about my type of business, so running a marketing and PR agency, is the scaling thing is fairly organic. As we grow and we sign more clients and we take on new projects, we just keep hiring more people. But I don't have to worry about inventory. I don't have to worry about supply chains. I don't have to worry about startup costs in terms of having to go out and buy a bunch of chassis. And when you decide to come to America, and obviously there's a chicken and an egg thing. I mean, you sold your first rig and you built, I love that you started building these things for yourself, which I think is really cool. But once you decide, okay, now we've got to set up a workshop and we need to have raw materials and we need to have all these components. How do you do that? How do you scale that when you don't even know? Because you just said you don't even know the size of the potential market. How do you figure that out?
I don't know that you do. At the very beginning, we said, look, we're just going to build this one customer at a time. And so, yeah, there's some not insignificant startup costs with new tooling and molding and all that sort of stuff. But it's a scary moment because once you make that commitment, you're in.
You better sell them, right? It's do or die.
Exactly. We went to one of the very first overland expos. Well, actually, I went there by myself for the very first one, just a little bit before we moved here. And so it was in Arizona. And the very first overland expo, and I don't even know how I heard about it, whatever, it was in somewhere in Arizona, small town Arizona. Never been there before. And if I remember correctly, there were 12 or 13 vendors total. And I looked around at the stuff that was there and I thought, all right, this is Australia 20 plus years ago. This is just a few months before we moved. And I thought, well, if this is that little twinkling light, this could be interesting. Again, there's all this open space in the US. So it's not as though there's not somewhere to take them. You've got South America to one end, you've got Canada to the other, and you've got all these wonderful places to go. There might be something in this. When we designed EarthCruiser, we made it so it's fit inside a shipping container. So that's actually why the shape and the size as it is because it will fit in a shipping container. Again, Australia's a great big island. So if you want to go see the rest of the world, you need to take all your stuff with you, which is why they are so self-contained and all the rest of it. So EarthCruiser doesn't care if it's in Bend or if it's in Bangladesh. It could care less. It still operates completely independently. And that's absolutely critical from our design perspective.
That's super interesting on the shipping container thing. I had no idea, but it makes sense and that's brilliant.
So size-wise, they fit in a normal car park. You can take them to wherever you want to do your shopping. All this, they're easy. They just drive like a car. Again, because it's that cab over design, you just got so much more real estate. And again, because we designed it from the very beginning, we didn't have to modify something. We designed the house to live in. So where we put the door and where we put the windows and all the other stuff and how high it is, all of that was designed around humans, not designed around cargo. So once you go inside and go, this actually feels pretty good. Yes, because it was designed for two people and a dog from the very beginning.
How far have you taken one of your rigs? Do you have any grand adventures?
Oh, yeah. We've gone through Africa. We've gone all over Europe, all over Australia, all over America pretty much. Not as much in South America as I'd like to. Canada a fair bit. Yeah, we've lived in for months at a time. That's great.
And it uses a diesel power plant. And then I think you said, so is it using the same diesel? Because like with my RV and a lot of RVs, there's like a propane stove and a propane fridge. And so it's all diesel powered.
100%. Ours is, my EarthCruiser's got just over 160,000 Ks on it. It's got 100,000 miles on it.
Has it always had solar? Is that since day one or is that a newer addition?
100%. Yep.
Wow. So it really is an off-grid rig. And then what about like water? Do you have to have city water or does it have some sort of like water filtration system as well?
It's got water filtration systems in it. So again, it's the efficiency of systems, how efficient it is with water and how much you use when you shower and all that stuff. It's got composting toilet. For us, that's just normal. We build production overland vehicles. So we pull water up out of creeks and filter it and put it into our tanks. And again, it doesn't care where it is. It can be anywhere in the world. It doesn't make any difference.
And it's interesting. I think a lot of American car people like to pretend like every real trend starts here and goes around the world, but the overlanding thing definitely did not. We had Evan Currid on, who was the founder of Tepui, and I think he was doing some of the first rooftop tents, and he was on a trip in South America when he got that idea, and they were made out of canvas. But like, it's interesting that I feel like we're a little late to the game over here. And so it's interesting that you had this thing you were already doing in Australia, and you bring it here at the exact moment that the overland market is just starting to kind of explode. So did people get it at first, or was there like a learning curve for the consumer over here?
I think most people could appreciate this is that the early adopters, they're not really adopters. There was something that they wanted to do and they needed a thing to help them do it. They already saw that this, whatever the thing is, if it's an EarthCruiser or if it's a marketing campaign, they already know that this is what they need and they're just going to go look for the person who can supply what they need. So that's really what happened in the first few years when we were here. We had people who said, oh, this is exactly what we want, but we couldn't get it. So terrific. Of course, that gave us a lot of encouragement. But how many people are like that? That's $1 million question, right? I mean, you don't know until you find out. And so that was very interesting in a couple of ways. Firstly, because our kind of people, people had come off sailboats and lived in all sorts of weird and interesting places, and now they want to drive around and stare. There was a lot of similarities, and a lot of those early customers, they are still really good friends, and it's just terrific because they were our people. It was easy, and they were very gracious when we screwed things up. When there was things that we were still figuring out about the building vehicle on the opposite side of the road and all that fun stuff. They were very gracious, and I don't think any of us should ever forget that. Let's never forget where we came from, ever. It's easy to do that. It's easy to say, well, we did all the hard yards. We did it on our own, and we're just so good. Absolute nonsense. We had people around us, if we knew it or not, that were nudging us and helping us along the way, and we can never forget that. ever.
That's good advice. So there's a quote on your website that I thought was really interesting. It says, "Great ideas come in all shapes and sizes. We have learned to listen and found that inspiration can come from unexpected sources." So I love that that's even on your website. Where did that come from, and what does that mean to you and to the company?
I think that's almost a traveler's mantra, right? Do we travel to say that we've been somewhere, or do we travel to learn and understand? It was funny. I was talking to Ellen, who does our marketing, and she's traveled everywhere. She's unbelievable. And we're just talking about efficiencies of heating, right? So you go to some very interesting places around the world, and she was traveling in, I think it was Somalia, and wherever she was staying, and could be 100 and something degrees Fahrenheit outside, but inside, it's still very cool. And it's just the way they build the homes and how they channel the cool air and etc. We've had similar experiences. And there's a lot we can learn from that. And we bring that mindset to how we continually refine our vehicles. I call it efficiency assistance because I don't know, that one's just stuck in my brain, but we can learn a lot from people who have not just travel, not just survive, but absolutely thrive in some of the most, some would say, inhospitable places in the world, but to them it's home. And so if we give ourselves a chance to think about it, how do they do that? And we can learn a lot without just consuming more, because they don't have more to consume. They have what they have, and they know how to use it well and not be a detriment. They had to know to live within their means, and I don't mean just financial means, but within their environmental means.
The resources available.
Thank you. That's a way better word. They know how to do that. Long answer to your question, but me personally have a lot to learn, and I really appreciate the chance to do it.
That's a great answer. So on that note, I've read that you've been getting involved in the EV side of the business. So it's fascinating that you've built these vehicles that are single fuel, diesel, go anywhere, untethered. And then when we kind of look at electric, and obviously that market is very different. Why did you decide to get into that market, and how does that work with the business model?
Story short is that GMC contacted us to see if we'd build something with them on the Hummer. So it was very much a collaboration with GMC, which would have been absolutely fantastic. And when we first started to talk to them about it, we said, listen, we don't build concepts. We're not into that. I mean, if we're going to do this, we're such a tiny little company and we're going to be judged by this. And so if we do it, it's got to be real. It's got to be real. And they were 100% on board. They said, yep, agreed. Can't be a concept. It's got to be something that people could use to the way it's been advertised. And we said, yep, that's what we want. Great, let's do that. So the truck campers have kind of looked like truck campers for the last 2,000 years. And we said, if we want to do this, let's really make it something. And so we worked with their phenomenal design team with the surfacing of the vehicle. I'm an absolute car person. So I learned so much working with the crew about how those designers think about things. It's just a completely different level of a rev head like me, building up a Land Cruiser or something. It's just different planet. It was terrific. And the stage gates that they went through, I want to just answer your question properly. The stage gates they go through to make sure that this thing is keeping to the scope of work and the design brief from the very beginning to the smallest of details. Now, 4 days and 3 nights. It must be able to sustain itself 4 days, 3 nights was the scope.
Oh, wow.
And it does that easily. Whether it be where the position of the heater, how it moves through the air to use the least amount of energy as it drives, the materials used inside, how well do they dissipate heat, or how well do they retain heat if that's what we want them to do, and where are they, what are they doing at the time, all of those things were considered. Absolutely phenomenal. That for us is just the most fantastic opportunity. We are absolutely going to put them into production. Of course, right now, having a fully electric overland vehicle to drive around the world, could you do it? Definitely. People are. Is it practical? No, not yet. Will it be? Absolutely. Will it be a full EV, or is it going to be some sort of a hybrid thing? I think it's going to be a bit of everything. There's a couple of interesting parallels I think we can draw, right? It was that what saved the whales from wasn't any environmental concerns. It was because it was cheaper to get oil out of the ground for heating lamps. No one cared about the whales.
Capitalism. Yep.
There's some big drivers that are going to happen if we like it or not. I mean, that ship's already sailed. It's already going to happen. Doesn't matter, right? The amount of real estate it took to grow enough corn to feed enough horses started to work backwards. It was cheaper to have a car. All of those things. So that's happening in our world. The transition is not going to be a straight line. It's going to be as bumpy as all get out, but it's going to happen if we like it or not. We were in Morocco having a wonderful time with an EarthCruiser, and I had an electric motorbike on the back. It was the Ubco two-wheel drive bikes. I love them. Huge fan. So we've had one for ages on the back of our bike, charge it up, let's drive along, yada, yada. Great fun. We stopped in this little village. We're staying there for a few days, having a lovely time. The locals come up. This is funny. I thought, they're going to want to look at the truck. No, they couldn't care less about my little EarthCruiser. All they cared about was that electric bike. And then we start to try and figure it out. Some sign language and some people come and help with some translation. Said, what's so interesting? Why? Because they are so far ahead on solar panels. They got all the sun in the world. They got more wind that blows through that part of the world like crazy. And fuel is incredibly expensive and hard to get, particularly, more remote parts of the desert where we were. Very, very expensive to move big, heavy fuel through there. And so the idea of having an electric vehicle, which they'd never seen before, so they could get their kids to school and they could pick up groceries from, they thought that was a best thing in the whole wide world. And so step for these local folks to go from, I've got solar panels, that's running my wells, that's doing all the things I need. And now if I have my independence to get the kids to school and get groceries, genius.
That's fascinating.
Particularly in places like India now and where the tuk-tuks are, they are going electric like crazy. It's not just because of pollution, it just makes sense. And so as the infrastructure picks up, it will change.
I love that. That's a great answer. Yeah, that's interesting.
And it's not going to be a straight line. Absolutely not. It's going to be bumpy and there's going to be dead ends and there's going to be people who think it's a terrible idea. In some applications, it's a flippin' dreadful idea. However, we're still going to roll down that road one way or another. And so as a tiny little company that had the opportunity to work with GMC, we had to do it. I think we had to do it. And it's for our crew to be exposed to that level of expertise and for us to get a stake in what I think the future is going to be, crazy not to. And by the way, it's 1,000 horsepower and it drives a dream and it's just so much fun. It's ridiculous.
I've seen them on the road and they are impressive. So that's, not your version, but a regular Hummer. And they're very, very interesting.
Yeah. So the camper comes off and you still got your truck and all the rest of it, but it integrates. So GM have asked if we would take it to the Chicago Auto Show. I think it's in February. Yeah, Michelle and I are going to drive it to Chicago. I'm really looking forward to that. And we'll do some trips on the way.
Very cool. I can't wait to follow along. Hopefully you'll document it on social or something like that.
Yeah, we should. Yeah.
So let's talk about your customers for a second, because I'm very curious that your customers, I'd like to learn more about them because it seems like they would have to have some level of affluence. Your rigs are more than $500,000. And so they're not inexpensive. And yet to buy something like this, I imagine would require a really specific personality type. I don't think these people are cross-shopping your rig and a Ferrari. Who are your customers and where are they coming from and what do they like?
So we make a couple of different models. So yeah, for sure, some of them are over $500,000. Some of them are in the 350 grand range. So still real money. The best way I could answer that question is that our customers value time highly. They may give up a weekend, but they refuse to give up a summer, meaning that the way you want to look at it is that I can do so much with this precious thing I have called life, and these are things I want to achieve with it. What is the best tool to go and do that job? That's our customer in a nutshell. I don't want an experiment. I don't want something custom and that may or may not work. I don't want that. I just want to buy something because I want to go and whether it travel around the US or around the world or whatever it is that you've got in mind, that's what I want to do.
So they want a seamless experience. They don't want to have R&D while they're figuring some home-built thing out. That makes sense.
And then have some value when I'm finished doing it. So we've had some customers have their trucks for 10 years. We have some customers who have their trucks for 2 years, do their thing, and then it's time to move on. So if it was, and don't get me wrong, I love some of the beautiful built vehicles out there. I'm a huge fan. If it's a production vehicle like ours, it has value when you want to sell it because it's a known quantity. And so your risk is dramatically less when you finish doing whatever your thing is. So I would say that our customers are clearly financially savvy, but also very time savvy. They're on a mission. They've got their goals and they're going to kick them, and that's all there is to it. That's it.
I bet you meet some really interesting people talking to your customers.
Absolutely phenomenal. I don't think we have too many customers, in fact, I can't really think of any, where they just go buy them and park it and look at it and go, geez, aren't I smart for buying this? It doesn't happen. When we see them after a couple of years, they're covered in scratches and they've had a ball. Excellent. It's just wonderful.
What's the wildest, most extreme adventure one of your rigs has been on with you or a customer?
Mate, it's ongoing. We have a number of customers. They're just lapping the world. That's just all they do.
Wow. They live in it full time and they're just on the road.
Pretty much. Generally speaking, people live in for about 3 months, park it somewhere, fly home, wherever home is, and go pick it up again for 3 months. But they just literally lap the world. That's it. That's all they do.
And when you decide to go to Africa or something like that, so you put the rig in a container and then fly there and then meet it at the port and then just get in and go? Weird question, but from a customs, how does that work? Can you just drive across borders? And
mostly, there's some common sense involved for sure, but mostly you'd be surprised how easy it is. Yeah. I mean, really easy. There's some places are tricky. Some interesting, like some places in like Mauritania and some of those, you got to pay a little bit more attention. Some places, the border crossing is just a little tin building somewhere. It's not overly complicated. And just again, be aware of one's surroundings. But yeah, it's surprisingly easy.
I'm inspired. One day.
Yeah, no, it's doable. I mean, last time we put our truck in a container, it had all of our clothes in it. It was done. We just go over, pick it up, and go. I've got a little Nissan Patrol that I do rallies and stuff with. So same deal. I just put it in a container. Right now, it's sitting in a friend's place in Amsterdam. It's got all my clothes in it. It's ready to rock and roll. I jump in a plane, fly over there, pick it up, and drive it. Done.
That's so cool. So pivoting a little bit, building any successful company requires effective leadership, but especially building something new, something that's a new category or a new idea really requires a strong leader. Can you share any leadership principles that have helped you guide EarthCruiser?
Well, I think there's probably only a couple of million ways I could have done it better and can do it better. I think it's so hubris to think that we get it right all the time. That's just such nonsense. So I really believe that a leader should always eat last, always, quite literally. It's definitely been a journey. It still is a journey. The level of responsibility one wants to take for their crew around them, it can't be a catchphrase. It's got to be real. And I think people do it at different levels. If it's your own business and you're not likely to be replaced by somebody else, that is such a two-edged sword, because I wonder how many company owners would just love someone just to come along and take this burden away from me today, please. If you're working for somebody, generally speaking, there's somebody else you can say, if things aren't going to work out, somebody is going to catch the ball if it falls. If you own the company, people are trusting you to make sure that they get paid on Friday. You have customers who have put their faith in you, and the times that you don't know what the right answer is, sometimes eating last is the very best thing you can do, simply because you get the chance to observe what's going on. You're not at the front of the queue, you're at the back of the queue. It gives you a chance to take a breath. Not leading from behind, that's not what I'm saying. It's that, are my people going in the right direction?
It's taking care of your flock and observing them at the same time, right?
Exactly. Because sometimes you need that, particularly when you're starting to doubt yourself. Sometimes you need that, particularly when things are not going well, or there's a decision you just don't know what the right answer is, or you've made a decision and it was the dumbest thing that could have happened, but it wasn't obvious at the time. So sometimes I feel that that's important. Eating last, putting yourself at the back, putting yourself at the end so you can actually see what's going on can help a lot. When you're at the very front, you're at the very top of that ladder. What's the old joke that I make sure that your ladder's on the right wall? You climb to the very top of that ladder, and if everybody's behind you, get to the top of that ladder and you go, uh-oh, wrong wall. Now what's got to happen? You literally got to ask everybody to walk backwards. That's hard. So sometimes putting yourself at the very end, observing, can do you a lot of good.
Great advice. Love it. Well said. For our listeners that are travel seekers, and you think back about all your journeys and the places you've been and the places you want to go, what's the highlight? Where was your favorite? Or where do you just need to get to that you haven't been to yet?
I want to go everywhere. We've got to travel tons and tons, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Just did a wonderful trip through Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. Highly recommend that part of the world. Just phenomenally fantastic. We're not long back from there. We're planning on a trip to Saudi shortly. This just sounds so contrite, and I don't mean it to come across this way, is that, our world is a wonderful place, and just taking a breath and sometimes just walking through your local park around the block and go, just observing the small things is a really big deal. I think sometimes, I know, fancy words like, get sent and all the rest of it, that may be one thing, but just sometimes turn off the phone and just take a breath and go, you know what, life's not so bad. Maybe that's being oversimplistic, and we've got to do some amazing, wonderful, interesting adventures and all that stuff. But sometimes just to go and appreciate where you are, because there's a lot of other people like to come and visit where you are right now. We are somebody else's travel destination. And so sometimes right, just go, you know what, this is actually pretty good for wherever it is, doesn't matter. But whatever is here, and there's a reason I'm here. And just to enjoy the moment, just take that moment, I have often found to be really precious, particularly when I really want to be somewhere else and go, hang on a second, idiot, where you are is actually good. The drive and the passion, all that's still there. That's not the point. It's just that where you are is okay as well. Take that moment.
I love that. especially for someone who's as well-traveled as you. So I can't think of a better thought to end this conversation on. So thank you, Lance. That was inspiring and loved hearing your story. That's the end of today's episode. So for our listeners, how can they learn more about you and what you do and about EarthCruiser, Lance?
Easy. EarthCruiser.com. We're a happy little tribe. We love what we do, and I get to work with some fantastic people. I'm a very fortunate individual.
Very good. Well, thank you for sharing your time with us. And to those listening, let us know what you think about rating this podcast on the platform you're listening to. I want to thank Lance again for coming on the show. It's been great getting to know him, and I hope we can stay in touch. Until next time, I'm Dan Kahn, and this is OTSS. Thanks, everybody.